Welcome to Did You Know with Richard Utley, during this 1 hour program. Join us as we take a look at today's headline news, Richard's views, history, inspirational interviews, and much more. Did you know this program airs every first and third Tuesday at 11 a.m. on Facebook and YouTube? Here's Richard now. Sit back and enjoy today's featured presentation.
Hey, good day. Well, we got a great program today. I have a young man I'm going to bring on shortly to talk about his book. I think you're going to find it interesting. I think you're going to find it intriguing. And hopefully it will inspire you to go out and buy his book on Amazon. But before that, I have a few things to say. For the last several months, almost a year, I've been telling you that we need to stop working things against us and figure out how to do them. For example, now you see Donald Trump, he decides he wants to do a mandate on voter ID. I've been telling you all along, instead of us trying to fight it, that we should not be fighting it. We should try to figure out how we're going to make it work. So instead of putting all that energy on trying to keep it from happening, we need to be counterproductive on that. And I've been saying that to you for some times because I told you it was going to happen. Now, he can't do what he said he's going to do because voting basically is a state kind of right. So, but that's not the point, because Pennsylvania, they are going to do voter ID. So I would recommend to you, let's start working on doing the right thing and be counterproactive. The other thing, I was sitting back the other day, and some of you are not going to like what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's wonderful to sing those wonderful songs, We Shall Overcome. Well, guess what? We're going to have to now step up to the plate and look out for ourselves. We're going to have to now to start to develop our own story. That's why I have this whole program, Did You Know, to define who we are and to set the narrative to who we are. So now with this whole movement of trying to wash history and change the perspective of history, it's our job now to talk about history. Because if we don't talk about it, if we don't tell our story, then shame on us. The other day I had a conversation with some young people, and of course we talked about history, and I talked about the importance of history, and they talked about, well, that was way back. You know what? They're crazy. They're crazy. That's right. I said they're crazy. We need to know what our history was. We need to know where we came from. The point is, when you know where you come from, then you know where you're going. And I think that's very important. And I think those are some of the things that we need to do. So if we don't do that, then shame on us. So I'm now saying from now on, we're going to have to start defining ourselves. We're going to have to look at economic development. We're going to have to look at our communities. We're going to have to look at what we can do for ourselves. Because I've been telling you for a long time, the stories that the horses are now out the barn and they're up the road, and it's too late to put them back in the barn. So I'm recommending now, and I'm going to keep saying this from now on, economic development. We need to define education. We need to go back to the way we used to be, because I don't think we have a choice. You look at this country, and we have to have a seat at the table. And the only way we're going to get a seat at the table is that we bring something to the table. We cannot put our hands out and beg, can we sit at the table? So if you don't have no motivation in terms of what's going on in this country, then you got a problem. I don't have a problem. You have a problem. Because I realize now that we have to tell our stories. We have to define things, because media is not going to always tell it the way we want to tell it. Media is not going to always tell it the true way. So when we talk about the African American Museum, and if we need to join, if we need to step up to the plate to make sure it's there, then we need to do that. We need to go back to the way old civil rights was, when they stepped up to the plate. I know it's old tactics, but we need to do those, create them as a new tactic. And this whole thing about getting upset and we're going to boycott this and boycott that. Those were wonderful things. But guess what? Boycott, what does it mean? You move from one store to the other store. We need to join together. We need to become strong because I don't think we have a choice. And I made a decision that I'm going to continue to say those things as long as I can say those things. What else is going on? Well, a lot of you sometimes don't know what's going on. That's why I have Did You Know? You know, facial recognition is coming around. It's in a lot of airports. So some of you need to know that they can take your face when you get to the airport. And you might not want to go to the airport. I'm saying that to you because sometimes we act like we don't know anything. We got to stay on top of everything now. I don't think we have a choice. We got to make sure we elected leaders that support us. We got to make sure that whatever agendas that we have in our community, for us, we got to look out for ourselves. I've been saying this for almost 4 years. I've had this program. I kept saying, look out for ourselves. Look out for ourselves. No more of this crying and pity and whatever. I don't think we have a choice, ladies and gentlemen. We got to make sure our kids can read and write. We got to make sure that our community is safe. Because if we don't, it's on us. I keep telling you, got to do your research and your history. For example, they defund the police. That was supposed to be a democratic thing or whatever thing, defund the police. Now, if you go back and you look now at some of the things that the Trump administration is doing, I think they would be defined as defunding the police. But they don't create that narrative. The other thing I'm going to bring up is that, all these taking over all these cities that have mayors of color, all of a sudden, all the crime, and they want to send National Guard. I want to give you a question. Which states really have the highest homicide rate? Red or blue? You figure it out. You do your research. Okay? Because I think it's very important. But I have so much to say today, but I got this young man on. I want to bring him on soon. But first of all, let's talk about history. I told you from now on, every time I have a program, we're going to share a little history. Okay, who's Jimi Hendrix? Do your research. Find out who he is. Okay? He was a musician, singer, songwriter. Do your research. I have someone else. Who's Aretha Franklin? Find out who she is. Everybody don't play basketball and everybody don't play football. Everybody don't sing as well. But we have so much talent out there and we have to promote our talent. If we don't, who do you expect to do it? Find out who this is. Do your research. Stop letting people define who we are. We need to define who we are and we need to tell that story. So I think history is very important. And so I'm going to give you 3 more words and I want you to look them up. I want you to look up Nat Turner. Find out who Nat Turner is. The other one I want you to do is the Haiti Revolution, 1791, if that'll help you. If Nat Turner will help you, then look it up. And who we knew. Who was he? I want you to look up those people and define who they are. I keep telling you, we have to do our own narrative. As I watch things going on, I'm laughing, but it's a sad story. Republican lawmakers cannot have it both ways. They cannot continue to push for tax cuts for the wealthy and not have it catch up to them in this country. Why do I say that? All of a sudden, they're moving money here, they're moving money there. So if you move money to give these tax cuts, well, who's going to pick up the slack? I can tell you who's going to pick up the slack. Local government and state government. So therefore, if you cut money from PEMA and something happens, where's the money going to come from to help you out? You're going to get it from the states? So if you go to the state, then the state would have to raise taxes, and they ain't going to want to do it. Local's not going to. But keep this in mind. All politics is local. And I want you from now on to start saying all politics is local and let's start from there. And I'll just give you one more other thing I want you to think about. You know, the mayor of New York is running, and they're saying it's going to affect all Democrats. No, that's New York. That politics he may have in New York would not fit in Pennsylvania. So each state has their own. Some politics that would take place in California would not fit in Pennsylvania. I'm going to leave you with this today, and then I'm going to bring this young man on. Democrats, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what you're thinking, but you better get moving. And you can't take nobody for granted. You need to bring young people. You need to bring all kinds of people in, but you need to get an agenda. And you need to start talking to people. Because I don't know where this country's going. I really don't. But at the same time, I can read, I can do research, and you Democrats are not winning the war at all. I don't even know if you started to figure out how you're going to win the war. And some of you are not going to like what I'm saying, but you know what? I don't care. I really don't care because I just think it's so important. That's why I've changed the platform for this program, because I'm going to say what I want to say, and I'm going to do what I want to do, because I think we don't have a choice but to have fighters now. We have to have leaders. We have to have people to step up. We can't have people being scared because we don't have a choice. I'm going to leave you with that today. We don't have a choice. So sit back before I bring this young man on. There's a couple of things that are happening around that we're going to promote here today. The first one would be the Stilton Fest. It's coming up. You see it there at the park. And they want people to come there and support them. And I think it's important that we support all kinds of neighborhoods, whether it's Harrisburg, whether it's Stilton, whether it's York, whether it's Philadelphia, whether it's Pittsburgh. We need to support organizations and things that are doing things for the community, because the community is very important to us. The other one, you see there's the African Culture Fest coming in Pennsylvania. It's on September 19th through the 21st. It's going to be at the Harrisburg Area Community College. You need to know about it. You can look it up, make plans to attend it, because it's called African Culture Festival in Pennsylvania. So I'm giving you this information. And the reason I'm starting to give you this information, because half the time things are happening. People say, well, I didn't know this. I didn't know that. And so how are you going to know? Half of you don't read the paper. Half of you don't watch the news. Half of you are oblivious to things that are going on. But from now on, guess what, folks? You're going to have to now step up and find out what's going on in your city, in your community, in your schools. Because if you don't, then shame on you. All right, well, who do I have on today, and why am I so excited? I got a young man on who wrote a book, The First, the Few, and the Only. And it's in paperback, and you can get it at Amazon, and I have it myself. I got the book, and, I've gone through it. But I want him to come on, and I want Michael to tell you, first of all, who he is. And then after he tell you who he is, then we're going to get in the nuts and bolts of this book, because I read so much of it, and I just think he has a story to tell, and I want him to tell his story. So, all right, sir. So tell my audience who you are.
What's up, everybody? My name is Michael Thornhill. I'm a neurodivergent poet, somatic strategist, and empathetic witness who happened to somehow get a master's degree that just basically an Afro-Cuban guy who learned about race once he became the only one in the room in high school in my senior year. And so once I became the only one with my face in the room, I had a whole world of learning I had to do what it means to be authentic in a Black or white world.
Well, I mean, this book is an attempt at telling this history of race through the lives and experience of the first, the few, and the only. So I understand that, because most of us has been through that. But what really triggered you to want to write this kind of book?
Yeah. I was consulting at this one company, and this Latin guy asked me the same question, and the only word that came to mind was sufriendo, and sufriendo in Spanish means suffering. Um, I suffered so much trying to figure out why people had such a tough time, not just with my face in the room, but with my authenticity, right? And there was times I felt like I know who God made me to be, but how come the impact and how I land in the room is always different? For example, how come when every time I say something brilliant when someone says a problem, it gets ignored or sort of hushed, and the next meeting there's some white body quoting it and everyone sees it as brilliant, right? How come, you know, when I was in my senior year of high school, I asked the young lady to the not to the prom, but oh yeah, to the prom, and she said yes. She was excited, and the next thing I know, she's like, "I can't go. My mom won't let me go." And when I show up, she's there with some unmelanated guy, right? And I'm not. I wasn't jealous. I was just like, "What's happening?" Right? Um, yeah. So at the end of the day, I had so many experiences, and the more I would talk to my friends in the medical field, the more that I talked to my friends in the academic space, the more I worked in the academic space, the more I worked in nonprofit, the more I worked in religious nonprofits, the more I talked to my friends in the military, the more I talked to my friends in Hollywood and Broadway, the more I realized that my experience wasn't just mine, and that my silent suffering alone um, was wrong. I wasn't alone. And so I realized that the more I wrote down these stories, the more I realized I wasn't writing down stories. I was writing down what became the book about the first, the few, and the only.
Well, let me ask you this. Um, I understand it because I was a product of it, and so that's why I wanted you on this program. Um, I just think that it's very important that you suffered what you went through, and that's what triggered it. So let me ask you this. So because it triggered it, I want you to. There's so many things in the book. I want you to talk about in your book you wrote like a letter to Martin Luther King and to Malcolm X. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yes, sir. So there are three primary characters that I use throughout the book, some fiction and some nonfiction, to articulate the journey of the first, the few, and the only. But at the end of the book, in acknowledgments, I wrote to certain people that inspired me, certain people that I felt like I had to do an homage to, as I named the stories I named that I had to acknowledge. And two of those people were the folks you mentioned. The reason I wrote a letter to Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Martin Luther King, is because I really I can't read that letter without crying, because I got to a point, sir, where I realized that what I was told Martin Luther King said is very different from the things that he actually said. I also realized that the Martin Luther King Jr. that they assassinated and murdered was not the same as the one who started and jumped in where he was asked to jump in as a leader. Um, there's a quote from Harry Belafonte that he says the last conversation he had with Martin, Martin was very upset after what he thought was a very successful meeting, and he asked him, "What's wrong, Martin?" And Martin said something to the effect of, "I fear that I've led our people into a burning house." And I wrote to that Martin and basically said, "I don't know if I can join you in your hope for this nation." And I asked a lot of questions like, do you still think it was worth it? Right? Because we as a people did not carry what you left off, right? We didn't catch the toss, we fumbled it, right? And where you planned integration and liberation, we settled for tokenization and economic disempowerment. And and it left me feeling essentially hopeless. Yet, as a Christian, I join you in God's hope for His kingdom, and not a wishful hope. There's two definitions of hope. One is a wishful thinking, and the other is a certitude. And so, we know what God's kingdom will do. And I just said to Martin, I don't know if I believe the United States is joining God in what He will do, and I don't think I can hope for this nation anymore.
When you look back at this whole thing about Martin Luther King, and Martin had a vision.
Yes, sir.
The vision that Martin had, if we look to where we are today, I think he would be a little upset because I
Absolutely.
would think that he would think we'd be further, including me.
Hmm.
So, what do you think that we need to do in order to help keep Martin Luther King's legacy alive?
Well, to start with honesty, sir, I can't speak for what Martin Luther King would do or say, but I do believe that Martin Luther King and Malcolm X would probably say the same thing at the end of their lives. Um, I think Martin and Malcolm were more aligned than they were apart when they first started. And so I think that thing is, and this has been echoed by many different Black leaders, some famous and others not, is that I think there needs to become a collective memory. I think that Black and brown bodies need to develop a collective memory of not just our history, but the history of the United States, which is all of our history. And I think that those white and brown, those with white bodies, also need to join us in that collective memory. When I see folks, raising their fists, in white bodies and telling people that they need to be deported and all this kind of stuff, I don't have I have some anger, but it's more rooted in the fact that they're operating out of a different history of the world than us. And for particularly me, you and me sitting here, right? That I went through the same K through 12 system as most other Americans, and I had to go back to learn the history of Jimi Hendrix, the history of Zora Neale Hurston, some of the folks you put up on the screen earlier. And when I learned their history, I realized that that history has a pattern, and that history is not history; it's still today. It's a continuum. And to answer your question a little more bluntly, I think Martin Luther King. I hope he would encourage people to buy my book, but I think at the end of the day, Martin Luther King would encourage a collective memory, and then add to remembering collectively a collective pain. That we would create some rituals around grief and anger, and collective movement and collective empowerment. And I think that would be primarily economically. And I think at the end of the day, we need to develop um, freedom from the golden handcuffs that a lot of the first, the few, and the only are bound by in corporate spaces, upper rank military spaces, admin, exec spaces in hospitals and academia. I think that once you get those golden handcuffs and get that paycheck and you depend only on that paycheck, I think it's much harder to try to change a system that you're bound by, that rewards you for not trying to change it.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here based on my experience.
Yes, sir.
And um, I know what it's like to being the only minority in the room.
Hmm.
I know what it's like to people sometimes look at you in terms of, are you really legitimately, do you really belong to sit here? And now with all this AI stuff,
Hmm.
it bothers me because a lot of people think that we got a seat at the table because of the color of our skin.
Hmm.
And there is some truth to that. But nobody never says you have to be smart enough to stay there.
Hmm.
No one never deals with that. And that's what upsets me. So my experience has been I know that I had to be good. I
Hmm.
know I had to be smart. But
Hmm.
at the same time, yes, I'm not saying that I did not get the seat there. But the key is, and I wish you would explain to my audience, it's one thing to get there. Well, would you please tell them, but you got to stay there. And because a lot of pressure, and I've had pressure, because I've been in situations I said, you can't screw up. Because if you screw up, nobody's going to follow in your place. Now, nobody wrote sign to me, nobody told me that, but I put it on myself.
Hmm.
I know I put it on myself. And so, therefore, you have to balance it two ways. And you got to balance it two ways. So I got the one group that tells me, I think he got here because of affirmative action or whatever.
Right,
I
right, right.
got that group. And then I got to also balance it that I'm in the position. Then I also look at the group that supposedly I represent, question who I am, Am I smart enough? And do we encourage people to step up to the plate? And I say that because I've even been in positions that I wanted to bring other people up. They were good, they could do the job, but they didn't want to go through the pressure.
Mhm.
So, your book, from reading your book, okay, the first, the few, and the only, that's very important. So now your experience in school, going to a school that you might have been the only minority.
Mhm.
And so there was pressure there. You also talk about in your book those people who wanted to assimilate into society, because sometimes people say culture. Everybody has a culture. That does not mean that you cannot be a part of the whole group. I mean, whether you eat, you can break it down. You can talk about Southern food. You can talk about this. You can talk about that. But at the same time, the journey and the pressure is that you got to understand that we need fighters. We need people out there to call it. Is that part of what you're doing, trying to call it?
I believe so. That's mostly book three, but 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 in book one, I like you mentioned, I didn't grow up in a space where I was the only black or brown body or face in the room, right? I grew up in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where most people were different shades of sugar or different shades of wheat, right? And then went to the north. I got moved to the north by my mother who had custody, and right before my senior year of high school. And I went from meeting all kinds of diverse people from all across the world, um, that didn't ascribe to any of the stereotypical sort of like racial stereotypes. And then I went to a place where me and my twin brother were the only brown faces in the room. And it wasn't just a culture shock for me, it was a culture shock for everyone else who got to know me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I learned very quickly about race based on how people expected me to respond. People expected me to speak second. People expected me to be a little more demure, a little more softer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm from, that's not that's not how we roll, as the song says. But I think that you asked a number of different questions, sir. But one thing that comes to mind is, what do you do, right? Was that one of the questions? Like, what do you do
Yeah.
with that experience? And I think one of the first and foremost things that you need to do is, like you mentioned earlier on this podcast, you gotta do your homework. The old heads always tell young bloods, do your research, right? Because what I have found is that James Baldwin, when speaking of Malcolm X, said the power of Malcolm X over the black community is that he corroborates their reality, our reality. And one of the things I sought to do and why I wrote a letter to Malcolm, Brother Malcolm, was because my dream in this book was to corroborate our reality, to do basically all the research for you, to basically let you know that what you've experienced at that school, in that hospital, training school, medical school, in the military, you're not the first one, you're not the only one. And in doing so, I think that once you realize you're not alone, that opens you up to collective pain, that opens you up to collective empowerment. Because for me, you know, I don't like to share my suffering with other people. The way I was raised is that, I like to keep my suffering to myself as to not burden anybody. What I realize is that there's this Honduran proverb that says, grief shared is half grief and joy shared is double joy. And that's very much a Christian principle as well. And once I started to practice that Christian principle rooted in that Honduran proverb, I started to realize that there's way more community amongst those who are suffering because I'm not the only one who's in pain. And what I want to speak very clearly to, sir, if I may, is
Sure.
that I'm not just speaking to the melanated and the black and brown faces in your audience. I'm speaking to the white bodies too. Because one thing I've kind of realized is that white supremacy, whatever you want to call it, it harms them too. And at the end of the day, some of the most amazing allies I've ever met realize that simple truth, that what hurts you hurts me. It's a very simple truth in the book of Acts, right? What happens to you happens to me, right? And so basically, that's also captured in the Golden Rule. And so, all these Christian principles I tried to capture in the book. As someone who was raised in the Southern Baptist Church and Christian Missionary Alliance, and what I was shocked by in the evangelical church. I went to a predominantly white church when I came up to from Fort Lauderdale to Newcastle, Pennsylvania. Is that there's so much that you know about the Bible, but so much you never apply to race, which has everything to do with how you treat your neighbor. And so as I explored that, I realized how come none of my Christian predecessors and people I look up to, and the preachers that I love to listen to will ever connect biblical principles to the idolatry of race in this country. And so instead of trying to talk about race, which everyone's already done, instead of trying to talk about, racism or class, which other people smarter than me have done, I decided to speak about it from the perspective of being the only one in the room, because that I can relate to, and I think a lot of people know someone like that that need related to too.
Um, and that has been really one of the real issues that have come up, even with this whole election thing.
Yes, sir.
When race has become a very inadequate part of today's culture, and
Mhm,
some reason, when it comes to religion, and we
mhm.
talk about joining together, let's be real. Since you wrote the book, let's be real.
Yes, sir.
We all know that probably Sunday is the most racist day. Why? Because everything is separated. Sure, you
Right.
have a multi, but you have sure.
Yeah, I would say I remember I was talking to this unmelanated man, who was a pastor in New York, very proud man, and I remember making that quote, and he was like, "I disagree." He was like, "I the pastor of a multicultural church, and it's there's so many churches I know that are multicultural, and there's a chapter called the Evangelical Church. You can look it up on the website at the first, the few, and the only.com. Don't type in the Google search engine. Depot's book's going to come up, not mine, but the first, the few, and the only.com. I think it's chapter 13 or 14, and in that chapter, I talk about how multiculturalism also became an idol in the church, right? Where there's so many churches that said, look, yeah, we're the most separated, let's come together. But just like the architects of integration, when they pictured black and brown bodies coming into their church, they did not give them leadership positions, right? They did not give them any control over any ministries, right? The multicultural churches would cry against that quote that Sunday is the most uh, separate separated day of the week, right? I would say that even in trying to fix that, I think a lot of white churches wanted to stay white because they always wanted a few black or brown folks to come to them. The reason I know this is because I was a missionary vocationally for, I want to say, 10 years. 3 of those years I was on campus. I was an associate pastor at a church. And the whole goal was to be multicultural, right? And this pastor who was a very proud man, and had a white body, and he had the MDiv, he had the doctorate in urban ministry and all this stuff, right? Um, but what I later found out was that he had a trail of black and brown bodies that were ministers behind him. When I come to found out that his history in the city was that any black or brown body that was charismatic that didn't bow to him and do exactly what he wanted them to do, he like ruined their careers. And so yes, at one time the U.S. was Sunday was the most separate time, and I think that is largely true for a lot of people in a lot of places. But I also want to say that I personally witnessed this man. Um, Even other pastors came to my defense. Basically, like Saul to David, had a contemptuous relationship with me when I was supposed to be his mentee, and it was primarily rooted in the fact that I got invited to the Q Commons talks in New York. I got invited to speak, and he would tell me, "I don't want you to speak anywhere," and essentially, it almost felt like a pissing contest I never chose to participate in. And why I say all that to your audience is because I personally witnessed a church dedicated to multiculturalism, um, basically be harmful to the only black and brown body in leadership. And the more I learned and interacted with other folks who are the only one in the room or in leadership, the more I found out that these churches that want to not be the most separated hour of the week actually integrate in a way, much like integration in America, where it's not integration, it's this, right? Where we will still have full control. Because if the church wanted to be multicultural, they would say, hey, you know what? We're going to go to where the black and brown churches are. We're going to go and integrate into their leadership teams. And we're going to take our tithe and contribute to their ministries, and then let those ministries contribute to both of our neighborhoods. It would happen within a week. But most churches want to find a few black or brown people to go out and find a few more to come in, so that you're always the forever minority. And I think that that kind of multiculturalism is idolatry, and that kind of multiculturalism is not the kind of integration that even Acts talks about. And that's why when you look at the scripture of the Jewish widows versus the Greek widows, that there is a distribution of power and resources, and that scripture captures what America did, where America, even in the church, said, no, we're going to give more to the Jewish widows. And we're going to only have a few Greek widows at a time. The rest can go figure it out somewhere else. So we can say we have both Jewish and Greek, but the Jewish widows will always have more power and always get more resources. And that's what they did in the church. And that's what the mistake we made with integration, despite all the amazing efforts of the first black and brown Supreme Court judge, uh, Thurgood Marshall, tried to do.
Um, I mean, this book is just so heavy. Let's talk about and let's talk about. You have definitions in terms of tokenism and all that. Would you elaborate to my audience on the key ones? And ladies and gentlemen, before he does, I want you to do your own research. Go, you look up your own definition, and then I want you to imply how you interpret how he interpreted.
Amen.
Go ahead, please do.
Um, you know, what's funny? I thank you for this question, because when I was writing the book, I remember thinking to myself, what's the one definition of tokenism? And what I've realized that um, there may be one definition of tokenism, and I don't claim to have the only definition. But what I did my best to do is to identify all the descriptions and experiences of it. One of the ways that I describe, not define tokenism, is that it's a psychosocial vehicle for access and resources. And so, for essentially what that means is that it's a way of being that the black and brown body adjusts itself to become in order to gain resources and access into opportunity that is usually monopolized by and for white bodies, um, by the U.S. government, and by systems that perpetuate it, and the corporationists. And so, with that being said, it's a way of being internally and socially that allows me to be what a lot of white folks usually like to say to me, and many folks that I interviewed in the book, is you're one of the good ones. Well, to be seen as one of the good ones, we had to watch you and learn what you want to see. And then in putting on that second self, that second personality, that second way of being in the world, we get access to the jobs and whatnot. And so, um, yeah.
Um, okay, let me ask. Okay, I'm gonna go back to because there's some other. I'm gonna talk about racism, but there was the different shades of belonging.
Ah, yes.
So please talk about the different shades of belonging.
Yes. So chapter 10 is called Different Shades of Belonging. And what that basically walks through is the fact that as an Afro Latino, Afro Cubano, I have found that belonging has a lot of different shades. For example, when my biological mother got pregnant with me and mi gemelo, my twin, that um, my abuelos encouraged her to give us up for adoption because they didn't want negros in la familia, um, and so we would be too dark. They were afraid we'd be too dark. Um, Born, I was being affected by race, right? Not just race, but skin tone. And what a lot of black and brown folks don't recognize is that Latinos have our own white people. We have our own people that reject me for the reasons of the hue of my skin, mi piel, and so um, or my hair. And what I wanted to unpack was the fact that before I can talk about black or white, every ethnic group has their own superiority complex and hierarchy. And I spoke from that perspective of when I was in middle school, this girl told me what her mom had told her, or I think her grandma. Um, she told her limpia la raza, which means clean the race. Or another woman told me Like her mom used to tell her like mejorando la raza, which means like better the race. And what that means is young Hispanic girls are told to basically find white boyfriends and sexual partners, so that they can clean the race and look white. And so this is something that Roberta Clemente navigated. This is something that I have navigated. Um, and so, speaking from that perspective, now when I'm the first or the only one with my face in the room, now there's a whole nother layer of things I have to navigate, because shades is not just tone. Shades also has to do with cooning, right? And if you know what cooning is basically where a black and brown body. If you ever seen Django, it's basically Samuel Jackson character faking a limp. If you notice, right before Samuel Jackson character dies in Django, he throws away the cane and walks normal. Right? Cooning is this idea of putting on a way of being that makes white people not see you as a threat, to such a degree that it almost mirrors a disdain for your own kind, right? And so it is a is a way of being that many black and brown bodies have a disdain over. But one of the things that the different shades of belonging unpacks is that um, whether I was with the Latinos, because I didn't speak Spanish and didn't have light enough skin, I was screwed. When I was in the white suburbs and I've done my history and I learned my background and I would try to speak from that perspective, I was sort of ostracized for having my own voice, not being disruptive, but for being outnumbered and having the audacity to speak up anyway. In the black community, different shades of belonging applies to the fact that I didn't speak ghetto enough, right? Or maybe sometimes I spoke too educated, or maybe I got too many degrees. And so my different shades of education, where basically I was seen as a pariah, because on one hand, people are proud of like me, yeah, man, look, our boy got a master's degree, but don't can't hang out with us, man, because you a lame, you know. And so basically, to be the first, if you and the only, a lot of white bodies don't recognize that you are exiled everywhere you go, just to create gain more access and get more opportunity. And for some, they pull up the ladder behind them and say screw everybody else, and others want to make a way for others to come up behind him and say, "Come, like I made room in this field, right?" Like Tiger Woods, for example. Let's say he was like, "Yo, I'm trying to get some black people to come learn how to play golf," but black people look at him as not black because he's part Asian, right? Because he's mixed, or he's not black because he's at all those country clubs, or he's not black because he's swinging a golf club. But let him win a tournament. Oh man, first black blank to win this. We're so proud. That's what different shades of belonging is all about. And that's something I think a lot of black and brown people can relate to. And I talk about passing as well, because at the end of the day, what I really try to say in that chapter is I used to have resentment for black and brown bodies that try to pass as white. I used to have resentment for a lot of black and brown bodies that coon. I used to have resentment for a lot of black and brown bodies that, by all social experience, feel like they've forgotten that they were black. But then I came to realize, no, they didn't forget they're black. They're surviving just like me. And that survival, I think we as a people need to have more compassion for, because we're all, at the end of the day, trying to get access to more resources.
Would you repeat that again? Because I think that's very interesting, because what you said is so true. I mean, I just want you to elaborate on it, because I've seen it, I've heard it, and it has always bothered me. You get those people, because I've even been accused of some, because I might have been in a position, or I might have said something in a way, and they say, oh, he forgets that he is a person of color, which
Hmm.
has troubled me because my mother and my father,
Hmm.
I had brothers and sisters, and I got relatives. So there was no way in the world that I could forget. And be honest with you, even if I wanted to forget, my family would not have let me forget.
Right.
And that has
Right.
bothered me. And so
Right.
why do we, and you write this book, and I think that's why I like the book, because you put things in perspective. You make us think. And the reason I got you on here is because we're going to talk about all kinds of things. Now, some people will like what you say, and there will be some people that don't like what you say. But as far as I'm concerned, you wrote what you believe, and what you believe is the truth in this book, because you talk about it. And sometimes we don't want to talk about things. We don't want to talk about mental health. We don't want to talk about things. Um, Also, you talk about movies and how we would define. There's just so many things in this book we can talk about today, but
Yes,
let's
sir.
talk about that because the image of what is created is what people think we are.
Yeah.
And when I say that to you, you can talk about Amos and Andy. You can talk
Mhm.
about those people, which I want you to do. Excuse me, I want you to talk about. But what people don't understand, that's how we're defined. That's how people look at us. I have walked down the street and I've seen people clutch their pocketbook. Why?
Mhm.
Or maybe they think I'm going to steal it. I've been in supermarkets, I've been in stores with based on how I was dressed, determined how I was treated.
Mhm.
If I
Mhm.
had a jogging suit on or a running suit or whatever, they treated me one way. But if I had a suit and tie on, they treated
Mhm.
me a different way,
Mhm.
even though I was the same person. And so, would you please elaborate on that?
Yes, sir. There are a number of different roles that I unpack, particularly on page 86 to 87 or 88. Roles like Step and Fetch It, Pick Me Negroes, Jim Crow Blackface Minstrels, The Sapphire, The Mammy, Aunt Jemima, and many, many more. One of the primary images that I think a lot of people experience is this idea of the black body as a savage, as a brute, as a sexual or physical brute. You may be like, "No, Michael, when have I seen this?" And I can start quoting you some movies. I quote you, no disrespect to Tyler Perry, but Tyler Perry movies where the black guy is a villainous, vitriolic brute, sexually and physically. And you can trace that imagery all the way to one of the most famous films in the United States of America, which is Birth of a Nation, which is a silent all black and white film, where essentially white men put on blackface and acted like they were trying to steal this white woman, and that they had sexually assaulted and killed her in the film, and then the Ku Klux Klan and the White Knights came riding on horses of at 1,000 strong to come and find these quote unquote brutes to come after them. The reason this is significant is because this shaped the American imagination. Let me be more clear to your audience. What I try to establish in this book is that there's a correlation between movies that make the most money in the US and that live the longest in the imagination of Americans and those that confirm and in flesh its worst stereotypes. So, for example, you could take a movie like Gone with the Wind. Okay, Gone with the Wind was one of the first movies to basically sell. I forget the number, but it sold so many tickets that it was like unheard of in U.S. history. One of the reasons I think is not because it had a great love story, but because it established a character called the Sapphire. Okay, the Sapphire is a character that is sort of that's sorry that's Amos and Andy. I'm mixing up my things. I think it's I forget the name of the character, but basically what was the name of the actress again, sir, that played in Gone with the Wind?
Um,
You know who I'm talking about. She won an award for that. She was the
I
first
know.
black woman to win an award.
I think I know.
Um,
Hattie McDaniels.
Hattie McDaniels. So Hattie
Yeah,
McDaniels embodied a character that basically was this boisterous, loudmouth, but really loving and would cook you something to eat, right? Character, and Hattie McDaniel won an award for that role. At the award show, she was not allowed to sit, eat, or enter the building. She was only allowed to come through the back, collect the award, and leave. Right? And some
yeah,
people say, "Oh, she did such a great thing," but what did it cost her to be the first? It cost her embodying a role that became cemented in the imagination of America to the point where if you ever watch Billy Madison with Adam Sandler's movie, he creates an over sexualized, mother like figure that's always in the kitchen ready to cook him some food. Why would, and if you look at that character in the movie Billy Madison, it almost doesn't fit. It's like, what's the point of this character? But that character is the same kind of character that you see in um, Hattie McDaniel's movie, Gone with the Wind. And so my point is that some of the most of the most high grossing films are the ones that capture some of the greatest stereotypes, particularly about black or Latino or Asian folks. There's a book called Memoirs of a Geisha. Memoirs of a Geisha was a book about this young lady who was sold in sexual slavery and navigating all that. Back in, I forget the day, but basically it was one of the highest grossing books in Europe, and it established this idea, this phrase called yellow fever, right? And this idea of the over sexualized Asian woman sort of taking your man, right? And so, and also sold crazy numbers here in the US. But whatever literally enfleshes the white imagination usually makes the most dollars. And I make a strong case for that. And I talk about other things like, you ever watch the movie Bagger Vance? You ever watch the movie not 8 Mile, Green Mile, the Green Mile? There's this idea of always having a magical Negro. And I describe that and define that in the book and give examples. And then, and later in that chapter, I have bingo cards that basically unpack different movies to date, like even Captain America Winter Soldier and Captain America Brave New World, where the same tropes are being used in current films today. And so basically, the imagery is important, but the problem is not representation. Representation is not neutral. Representation on screen can fulfill a stereotype or counter a stereotype. And a stereotype is usually used in films, and that term is called sardoodledom. Sardoodledom is a 17th century playwright, I forget his name, came up with this idea of making mechanically contrived characters to push along a plot, which basically he would use stereotypical caricatures, not characters, caricatures, in order to push along some contrived plot. So, for example, let's say, you know, we need a racist black man, and we need a voluptuous black woman. And so we're just going to make those characters, and that's all their depth, and they're going to help us move along the plot. And I'd say that most of American media are doodledom, and it uses caricatures instead of actual good narrative to push a story along. And I think that's harmed the black and brown community for years and to this day.
What is your? I read your definition of. I'm going to give you. When you say somebody's prejudice, what do you mean by that?
Mm. So glad you asked that. For those who need a re-up, I did equity and inclusion learning and development for, I want to say, 15 years. And I took some of my most favorite trainings from Northwestern, University of Michigan, um, the Pittsburgh CLO, Broadway, and different very wealthy private schools that I don't think I can legally say out loud. I took all their favorite trainings they used to pay me a lot of money for, and I put it all in something called Appendix A, which is entitled White Eyes Only. And in that section, I give definition after definition after definition. Prejudice is something I'll define for you based on what I wrote in the book, if I could find it fast enough. Or here we are. And so basically, what I want to do is just highlight the fact that from bias to prejudice to discrimination, um, to all different kinds of bias, I unpack the fact that all of these lead into one another. In the book, I say prejudice is the judgment or assumption you make about someone before knowing them. It's often based on stereotypes and bias, and unlike bias, which can be unconscious, prejudice is more active. It's when you assign meaning, motive, conscious motive, and worth to someone purely based on their racial, ethnic, or cultural background. And what you got to recognize is in the book, I acknowledge the fact that bias leads to prejudice. Prejudice usually is the soil for discrimination, and that discrimination is usually the soil for racism, and racism is the soil for oppression. And I guess you got to read the book to find out what that leads to. And so at the end of the day, these all actually feed one another psychologically and collectively.
Um, I want to, I want to move this. There's so much in this book. I just want to move some things. Um, and people did not understand as you wrote this book and the things that you've gone through because you didn't really get into it. I'm going to ask you this: did it define you? Okay, okay. You were adopted. You and your brother were adopted,
Yes.
and you were adopted. And did your mom had to let you go because her family did not want to have a a
Neighbors.
dark a
Yeah.
dark skin person,
Yes,
right?
sir.
And
Yes, sir.
then you were adopted and you moved up. Did that help define who you are and what made you feel that you were going to become a champion of writing these kinds of books? And also the experiences of what you've gone through.
Um, Yes, it was deeply formative, but it didn't help me write these books. What helped me write these books was a desperate need as an orphan, as an adoptee, as someone who grew up never seeing their face in the room, never seeing their face and their family reflected back to them, never seeing their nose reflected back to them, and to this day wrestling with any sense. People say you're handsome, you're beautiful. I'm like, no, I can't see that. Right? A lot of biracial and adopted kids can't see, behold their own beauty or glory. I suffered from that. Right? All these things and more, being moved right before my senior year out of a class of 700, everyone's mixed with something, to an all white school from elementary to senior high in the same building that totals 700 people in the building, right? All these experiences led me to a desperate need to figure out my coexistence in the world, to make myself make sense, to validate my own existence, a desperation to corroborate my own reality, right? Because most of my life, Mr. Utley, I have felt alone. I have felt defective. I have felt crazy, right? And the more people I talk to, and actually, I started with most of the people I would talk to were dead people. And I don't say that to be weird. I say I interacted with the history of Martin Luther King. I interacted with the history of Malcolm X. When I heard that Malcolm X was at an all-white high school, he was the top of his class academically. He was the top performing athlete at every sport he put his hand to. And when I heard that the principal of that all-white school in like Michigan or Minnesota, okay, pulled him aside one day in a classroom and said, "I don't care how much you beat these white boys. All of your accomplishments are going to end only in the brush of a broom or the cleaning of a dish, because all you ever going to be good for is cleaning dishes or mopping floors." And that shaped him. That brilliant mind later went and moved with his dad in a black neighborhood on the East Coast, and then applied himself and his brilliance to making sense of his coexistence, not in a white world, but for a black one. And not just a black one by the end of his life, but for a world that we can all live in, right? And it's that very same fire that I know a lot of adoptees feel. I know a lot of orphans feel. I know a lot of multiracial, biracial kids feel. Listen, do you not know that a lot of multiracial kids with white mothers usually experience some of the worst racism than any other black person? Because they grow up around it. They're not defended from it. They're not protected. Okay. So when Uncle Johnny or Grandpa Joe says racist stuff, okay, or when they're put in a school and by third grade they have to straighten their hair every day just so that people don't try to run their fingers through it and mess with them, you develop a complex, right? And you're outnumbered. It's not like you can fight everybody either. It's that pain. If you got a grandkid or a niece or nephew that's black or brown and you're in a white body, I'm telling you, if you don't think they're being ostracized at school, you're out of your mind. And I'm gonna talk about the students. I'm talking about the teachers. They did a study. Let me say this one piece. They did a study where they took 1,000 something teachers, okay, white teachers in Canada, and they said they had a black boy, a black girl, a white boy, and a white girl playing at a table on camera, live stream. And they said we want you to look for the behavior problem and chart down on this test. This is a study on who misbehaves the most, who has the most misbehavior. What they didn't realize is the study wasn't the kids, the study was the teachers. They did a retinal test. They were watching where their eyes looked. Did you not know that I think it was 85 to 90% of the time, you know which child they stared at the most, looking for a problem? The black boy. They now the children were actors. And for an hour, they watched the black boy looking for a problem 90% of the time. So if you don't think your children's being ostracized at school, I was one of those kids. And I came to later realize I am a good boy. I was just being watched and they were looking for a problem. And so it's that experience is why it was, yes, how I was raised and what happened before I was born was powerful, powerfully formative, but it was the desperate need to make sense of my story. It was a desperate need to see myself reflected back to me. That's what made me write the book because I don't want anyone to ever have to experience what I've gone through. So,
I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to let you close up. Time is just running so quickly here. I am a product. I was told I wasn't going to be much of anything when I was very young.
Mm, mm,
I'm very clear about this because, and I'm not ashamed of it, I was in special ed. I was put
mhm.
in special ed and I was told I was a slow learner. I wasn't going to be.
So it's
Now,
Chance the Rapper.
and I'm not going to tell you that it still does not affect me sometimes. I don't
Mhm,
look back. I can't undo what's undue. I can't do that. But what it's done for me, it's made me stronger, and it
mm,
made me realize that I can't let anybody define me but myself. And
mhm,
that's why I have this program. Did you know? Now think about it. I was in special ed. Think about
mhm,
it. I was
mhm,
told I wasn't going to be anything. Think
mm,
about it. Now we can sit back now and say, "Whoa, you graduate! I graduated from the University of Pittsburgh."
mm.
Okay, and I like to believe in my heart I'm not at that category, but it could have defined me, and it did define me. And
Yes, sir.
sometimes it defines me to this moment
Mhm.
because it tells me if I was told it, there's some people out there that's still being told that. And we
Yeah.
need to be positive role models. So I'm going to ask you this. The
Mm.
program is running quickly here. So in the next 2 minutes, tell my audience what you want to tell them about this book because there's just so much in this book. I was trying to read, I go back and forth. I mean, I'm going to have to bring you back on just to deal with some other things in this book
Yes, sir.
because I've even read some comments. See, I can read comments from other people. And you know what some of them said?
What?
Good topic. Good
Mm.
topic because sometimes we don't want to be real.
Right.
Sometimes we want to sugarcoat things. And when I met you, remember, I met you personally. We started
Yes, sir.
talking. And you
Yes, sir.
told me about the book. And I said, I want you on my program.
Wow.
That's
And
right.
then you said, and then I went and I bought the book and
That's
I
right.
read it. And I'm not done reading it. So please tell my audience in the next 2 minutes what you want to leave them with.
Um, in the family that adopted me, um, they would make this joke that Michael ain't never gonna be a writer. He ain't never gonna. We got worried about Michael. He ain't, we're afraid he ain't gonna accomplish nothing. And it wasn't rooted in who I was. It was rooted in their perception of me. And I just want you to know I didn't take English classes like to write. I didn't take any creative writing classes. I didn't go to any special schools. I'm just a mixed adopted kid from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, who was afraid to write, not just because of what my family said, because I had so many black and brown and white bodies that would steal from me. They would take my brilliance. I would say something out of a meeting, and they would take it to the next meeting. And next thing you know, they're getting the funding. So I wrote as someone who felt the water rise but chose not to drown, and I think that's true for a lot of you listening. And so, for me, this book is not just for the first, the few, and the only. It's for anyone that knows us, anyone who is us, to recognize that I'm not trying to tell the story of race. I'm trying to tell our story. And in understanding our story, I think you'll find a skeleton key and quite possibly a prayer of hope. Um, because at the end of the day, I'm trying to expand the memoir genre into something I'm calling mirror memoir, where this book is part workbook, right, Richard? It's not it's there's space to write down your story. It's part toolkit, it's part memoir, but it's a book that when you put it down, you realize that it's reading you. And so um, I want you to read at the pace of your body. This is not a book that was made to blaze through. Um, as Dr. Wes Menicum said, I always encourage my readers to nibble, not gorge, and read at the pace of your body because memories will come back to you. And so I want you to be kind to the part of you that needs to remember those. And at the end of the day, this book, it's my love letter to, if you were the only one on the bus, if you're the only one in the boardroom, if you're the only one at the lunch table, if you're the only one in the church leadership, if you're only one with that kind of badge and at that rank and file, I think that Also, what do they say? All skin folk ain't kinfolk. And I wrote a book really unpacking what that really means, because I've been wounded a lot, and I've met a lot of people who are wounded. And let me just say this last thing. There's so many people in the black and brown community, or with black and brown kids, like, man, we got to get you to college. You gotta lock in. You ever hear those black speakers who are like, you gotta be serious about your life, you know? But you know what? You know what? No one ever tells those kids what to expect when you go off to all white spaces. No one ever prepares that kid for the precariousness of white women. No one ever prepares that kid for white teachers that will watch you more often and look for you to mess up. Where I used to think something was wrong with me, I realized, no, I'm being ostracized and singled out. That's what that's called. You're not dumb. You're not defective. You're not alone. And one thing I want to acknowledge is that these three books, the first that's out, is I can't stop what happens to your nephew or niece, or to your son or daughter that's mixed, or the one you adopted, or your partner that's melanated. I can't tell you how to stop what's going to happen to them, but you, just like a good football coach or a good boxing coach, you can learn the plays and the patterns, so that by the time they go out there, they can see the punch coming. And that's what I did in this book, that you will see the punch coming, and the slipping and fading and the dodging of the tackles meant to injure you won't, because how you dodge them is up to your creative heart and mind. But the fact that you can recognize what's coming, that's up to those who are say they love it and want to protect you. And so that's what I did. I try to give a resource and a tool to all those that want to love and protect that melanated brown body in their lives. And I have a section for Appendix B called Blighter Blessing. It's written to white husbands and white wives of, or partners of black and brown bodies. And basically, it's memoir, it's memory, it's toolkit, and it's survival guide, all in your hand. It's two books in one with a digital companion you can check out at any time. So thank you so much for having me on, Richard, and I hope you not only buy the book but that you're blessed by it.
Well, I want to bring up your little sweatshirt there, buddy. I want
Yeah.
people to see your sweatshirt. Would you
Yes, sir.
explain your sweatshirt, even though it's on the book? Would you explain your sweatshirt, please?
Yes, sir.
Before
So
we get
it's the same image that's on the book. I wrote it. I got this image so that while you're reading it, other people can feel seen by it. This is a photo by Jonathan Zoatman. And while he was in New Zealand, he was in a field of alpacas, and he caught this image. And I remember the first time I saw this image, I never felt so seen in all my life. And so 6 years ago, I recognized this would be the cover for the book. And and I really feel like it's art, because some people, I remember one guy said to me, man, this guy makes me think of that one white ally who's saying, just like in the book, check this out. He's like, don't look at me, look over here. Right? Everyone, I feel like a lot of fur alpacas want to be seen, right? Or they're watching you, watching them. But this one's like, no, look over here. Another person said to me, well, I won't say what they said, but at the end of the day, that this image is about what it feels to be the only one, the first and the few. And there's a lot of emotions that come up. So for me, I would ask you, sir, what emotions come up for when you see this image?
when I see that image, it represents that was me.
Mm,
That that was me.
mm,
Been there, been
mm.
in the same field,
Yeah.
felt the same way that you felt.
Hmm.
So thank you for coming on, and I got to bring you back on.
I love that. I look forward to the day.
Thank you, and have a good day. And ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you got something out of it. Read it, buy it. You can get it on Amazon. I have it, so you can buy it. But if nothing else, ladies and gentlemen, I just want you to think. Think about what your life has been like
Yeah.
and what you've gone through. And
Mm.
a lot of things I'm sure you've gone through that you kept to yourself, but today you thought about them.
Mhm.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you for watching Did You Know with Richard Utley. Please mark your calendar and join us every first and third Tuesday at 11 a.m. on Facebook and YouTube. Did you know? If you would like to be a guest on the show, or if you have an interesting topic or individual that you would like to see us discuss during future broadcasts, you can reach out to us on Facebook at Richard Utley. Until next time, have a nice day, and we will see you again for another Did You Know, and can be found on most of your favorite social media platforms.